Seasalt is a dark fantasy reverse horror action strategy game where you play as the nightmarish force of Dagon by controlling and growing a horde of minions. That was a mouthful. It came out in 2019 and was developed and published by YCJY Games. The Steam storefront gives the great summary of Seasalt is an action strategy hybrid in which you are an old god summoning unfathomable horrors to blight the human lands. You will have your sacrifice and humanity will pay for denying you what you're owed. The game involves you going through branching paths on a mission to deny the hubris of man in the city of Nova Ugarit. You advance through stages in each zone, commanding a variety of nightmarish creatures, from little zerglings to magic-wielding cultists. There's a total of 16 different units you can use, and they all add a lot of variety to your approach. You unlock these as you go through the game, and some of them are hidden away. We also choose an apostle to play as during our run. We could change this apostle between missions if we wish, but it'll add a large modifier to the game, emphasising different minions and strategies. So there's a lot of customisation available, even if you're like me and just run the same combo every time. The main pull of the game is that you don't control the minions directly, instead you're an otherworldly force guiding them. There's a lot of strategy in directing the swarm to attack your victims, or choosing to withdraw them to avoid the enemy's attacks. The terrain also plays into this, giving you multiple routes in your journey to the Grand Cathedral. There's a whole range of enemy types, special bosses, and even an optional boss snuggled in there. We're going to get into exactly what the game has to offer, the units at your disposal, and the story of Dagon's revenge as we progress through the video. Besides progressing through the story, there's also an arena challenge mode and a hard version of the campaign where some things get switched around, including enemy placement and boss attacks. There's quite a lot of hours of gameplay here. To address graphics and music, it's another pixel art style game. I know, I seem to love them on this channel, but the graphics feed into this old Victorian eldritch aesthetic. There seems to be a lot of inspiration from Bloodborne specifically. The graphics work for the game and everything stands out where it needs to. I do have one complaint in that the bigger the graphics are, the better it tends to do it in this game. Some of the smaller bits of art get lost and a bit smudgy. Like, without the tarot card, I wouldn't be able to know what the swarm was. I'd have zero clue what it was meant to be. Some of the bosses seem a bit out of place in their appearance, like the Fawn Guards. They do try and explain this in the lore, but they just don't match up with the other humanoids. Otherwise, quite nice graphics. There's some good environmental effects as well, like fog on the Admiral Pierce fight, or shadows in the sewers. The music's great and the SFX works really well. Even the different minion noises tickle my brain in all the right ways. I'm going to play a few clips of some of the music across the game, but you'll be able to see how it carries the feeling they're going for. We're going to hop into the story next. Now, this game does contain branching paths leading to you being unable to access everything in one playthrough. For simplicity's sake, as everything leads to one ending, I'll be dealing with the branches simultaneously. So in the game it might tell you to go north or east. Well, we're going to pretend we did both at the same time. They tend to just be iterations on the same area anyway instead of something unique. It's just the bosses tend to change. So please expect spoilers from this point. The introductory cutscene shows us how the status quo is in Nova Ugarit. The city lives in prosperity, with gold adorning the chapel of Dagon. The Archbishop is one of a few called for sacrifice, though the hubris of man knows no bounds as he refuses his Dark Lord. This is the straw that begins our campaign against him and sets up the plot. The dawn of a coward's penitence, as we take our swarm and crawl up through the sunken city. The ruin serves as a tutorial of sorts. We've covered it in previous sections, but we control a swarm of Dagon's minions. Now we direct them using W, A, S and D, but we don't control them directly. If we hold spacebar, they'll become aggressive, attacking anything nearby, or firing projectiles if they're able. We're introduced to the swarm as a minion type. They come in large numbers and can overwhelm most enemies, but they are weak to being chipped down or attacked with AoE. They won't really cut it for the stronger ones. Now I'd put them as an A tier minion as far as they go, and in the book they're described as the most common of the unspeakable arthropod horrors lurking in the sea. They are that which hides in seaweed. They are that which snaps at you as your toes try to find the bottom. They are the antediluvian vermin that scurried through old surface worlds which now lay buried beneath the sea. We also get introduced to the worms, whose primary ability is being a slightly stronger melee unit. They can melt through wooden barricades in one hit instead of having to blast down their health. They tend to get outperformed by most other melee units, and they don't come in high enough numbers for me to put them above the swarm, so I'd say they're a B tier minion for me. In the Book of Dagon it states, like the swarm, worms are part of the arthropod phylum and started appearing on rotting civilizations that came before, feeding on old knowledge and putrid corpses. They now exist to thwart progress and consume discarded hollow bodies of the sacrificed. As we rise through the ruins, we enter the ship of Admiral Pierce. A man convinced Dagon's favour still smiles upon his crew. It's clear from this we're attacking the city the same night the bishop rejected the sacrifice. Loyalty was ingrained from years of prosperous service under the direction of Dagon. Though the mouth of order outweighs that of the gut, Admiral Pierce laid his belief in the church instead of in that which was tangibly before him, the true old and dark power of the beckoning sea. For all he knew was the axiom that by the will of the church and the sacrifices they performed did he and his men gain such respect on the seven seas. Boss fights in this game tend to be quite cool. Learn the enemy's attack patterns and punish them when they're vulnerable. Pierce will fly about and shoot his cannon at us. If we're unlucky, he can take out a large chunk of our swarm, or the swarm entirely. Killing him, however, shows us an example of Dagon's power, and grants us the Cultist, a straight S tier unit. The Cultist is our first range minion, and if you use them in large numbers, you can have so much DPS you can melt through enemies before they're even aware of your presence. In lower numbers, they're less effective, but still have the edge of being ranged. In the book it states, "When the first of the humans started worshipping Dagon and the tremendous power beheld in the sea, they followed Triton. He led them 1,000 fathoms deep into everlasting life. Those that emerged became wielders of mana, mindlessly lending their abilities for the praise of Dagon." The bishop receives word of our attack on the ship and declares Dagon has gone mad, not telling his subjects he was meant for the chopping block instead. The next area we enter is Karlshaven, a small coastal town on the edge of Nova Ugarit. The area is very Cthulhu by lamplight, and the game does a very good job with its variety of environments. There are two routes available through Karlshaven, the north or the east, each one resulting in a different boss and different minion unlocks. The whole experience is like blasting through the streets of Yharnam if you've played Bloodborne before. Unlike the ruins, enemies come with variety and can work together to bat back your horde, so the difficulty does ramp up slightly. The north route is the hardest in my books, not necessarily in terms of the area as a whole, but with the boss fight of Deacon Raphael and his flame leaders. None are weaker and more fragile than Raphael. He hides himself in the old cloth of the cult of Dagon and cowers behind a revered title as he preaches of his preordained life. When the day of sacrifice comes, he is happy to serve by using his wormy tongue to devise tales captivating ignorant people of the village, and watch as they let blood flow and rejoice of promised benediction. Then, with false humility, he will collect coin for the bishop in the name of the Great Old One. These guys are tough if you get greedy fighting them. Heading through the north route, we unlock the Spitters, another S-tier range unit that fire out a rapid slowing salvo. I actually rate them higher than the cultists, and in the book their entry reads, "Seen by some as messages that came from another planet, great monoliths were erected by primitive cultures in their name. However, as knowledge of the old gods became prevalent, it was apparent that they were created as specialised hunters, capable of capturing and poisoning their prey from a distance by breeders of the old civilization. This might explain their appearance looking all xenomorph-like." Both routes give us the crabs, which are hardier melee units with fire resistance. They're great for soaking some damage for your weaker minions and end up at A tier. In the book they get oversold as, imagine giant spiders with armour, huge sharp claws that can crack a skull like a walnut, and antennae feelers which can sense fear pheromones from thousands of miles underwater. They are the tiny tanks of the sea. Shotgun blasts bounce off their shells, and fire only makes the air around them smell a little better. We also unlock the flies for killing Deacon Raphael, possibly the fastest melee unit in the game, with the trade-off of being incredibly weak, but in high numbers. They're best coupled with other units to stop enemies and let those other units do the damage. I'd slot them in at B tier, and in the Book of Dagon it mentions, when the fishermen of Karlshaven were gifted copious amounts of fish by Dagon, as a benevolent reward for their uncompromising sacrifices, they had so much that tons of fish were left to rot by the shore, bringing hordes of flies that grew to frightening sizes. The east route is much easier, with the only issue being the wharfman, a huge anchor-swinging brute. Windows of the tavern glistened with dew. The morning outside was quiet and cold, but a hearty warmth brewed inside. Glenn sat with his friends drinking ale, winning arm wrestling competitions, and singing songs of beautiful maidens with rich evil fathers. Here he could rest from his back-breaking work, and dull his thoughts from the nightmarish memories of his days out at sea, where he constantly felt watched by a writhing fury beneath the surface, past its deepest depths. In terms of the minions we get, our first stinker is the Madman. He's a unique, uncontrollable unit with the sole purpose of inciting fear in the enemy, fear stopping them from attacking. The problem is, due to his random movement, he's just a bit of a wasted summon. I'd give him a D tier. And in the book, his entry reads, "What has he seen? What does he know? No one really understands him and no one really cares to. Let him be, but don't let him come close to me." Instead of the fly, we get the Drauche, a large melee unit that bursts into loads of little minions upon death, and I never got much use out of it as I saved my summons for the range boys, but it still stands in B tier for me. The game sometimes gives you too much choice, and the Drauche was just didn't make the cut for me with that in mind. They're described in the book as the largest of the arthropod family. These grotesque creatures were aptly nicknamed the Drauches, with the purpose akin to a transportable egg. Being hermaphroditic, the Drauche doesn't require a partner to reproduce. Instead, upon death, it releases countless sperms that seek to burrow inside another creature, which then changes the genetic code of said creature and deforms it into a new Drauche. Now, they don't actually do this in the game, and I wish they did, but that gets replaced by the maggots later on, I guess. In terms of the Wolfman's boss fight, he's quite fun. The idea really is to avoid his punishing melee attacks, wait for him to throw his anchor out, and then punish him back. The Rotwood's a bit weird. We can see the throes of battles here, showing us that perhaps the group we control are not the only agents of Dagon that have been sent. More importantly, the Bishop's men aren't our only enemies. The biggest additions here to the Bishop's militia are lumberjacks. We have to bait their attacks as they can very easily wipe out your swarm. There's a lot here with Molotov throwers and flamethrowers and 2 minions hidden within the Rotwood. So it's quite a decent area. Now, the 2 minions hidden within the Rotwood include the Creature. It's a unit that gets summoned one at a time, which can attack at range and immobilise individual units. It's probably my favourite unit in the game. With a great amount of damage and low risk attack style, it's an easy pick for S tier. Now, the book states, from the lagoons and swamps, wallowing forgotten forests, a creature formed from constricting vines. Village people living in the Rotwood forest fear it and tell horror stories to their children, never to wander alone to where the water's deep green and drowns hanging trees. One such creature, looking at a farm from the lagoon, fell in love with a woman, but upon their meeting she was scared into never returning home. He's a very cool Creature from the Black Lagoon reference. Alongside the creature, you can find the shaman. They're a group minion similar to the cultists, which can heal others. This is useful, don't get me wrong, it's just useful in quite niche situations. I've had it more useful in hard mode, but I'd rather use the summon for more creatures. C tier. So the book states, these brand of cultists dedicated their life to nurturing antediluvian creatures, demons and their ilk. They'd gather in swamplands outside of Karlshaven and drape their bodies with skin of fish that could not be saved in a ritualistic practice of remembrance. Their magic seems to be rooted in voodoo, utilising mushrooms, herbs and other vegetation to imbue their spells with healing properties. Now, fighting further on through the Rotwood, we see cultist bodies piled on stakes and we fight the man who put them there, the Lone Warden. Out in the hills, the last of the Templars gathered, building a refuge for the remaining Christians. There they were ambushed by armed forces of the Church of Dagon, and the allied houses followed it. All the Templars were cut down and left to rot, all but one. He knew he'd need an army to defeat his oppressors, and by practicing necromancy, he found a way to bring his comrades partially back to life. But this obsession took hold of his soul and made him an iron husk, only living to fight something long gone. The Warden's an interesting fight. He's flanked with ballistas and can call upon some unholy yet uneldritch powers. You can time things just right and knock him off his horse too, evade his magic and the fight will go smoothly. In hard mode, he actually summons some zombies, and I feel like this could have been in the main game. I don't know why they limited it there. Defeating the Warden grants us the Lich, a support minion that you'll only ever have one of in your horde at a time. Their effect doesn't stack. When you kill an enemy, it summons a ghost to your horde for a short time. Now, this can be really great when you kill a lot of weak enemies in succession, and one of the apostles removes the time limit on these ghosts, making them last in permanence. A tier. With the book describing it, reuse and renewal, the recycling of life, males were never trained as necromancers. They did not harbour life in the way needed for the magic to work. And the few females that had the will to be trained in necromancy were seen as oracles and priestesses, birthing spirits back into the living world through the seed of death. Necromancy became deeply connected with Christian faith when Joseph and Mary tried to use necromancy to bring their dead son back to life. Heretical works, but that does take us through the Rotwood. The bishop warns his flock that they're in danger due to Dagon and swears to use faith to defeat him. The funny bit being he caused this whole mess, but I suppose they won't find out about that. The next area for us is Hogstead. We can head north or east, with the major difference being the boss at the end of the zone. Hogstead is much easier if you head east. Both regions see a lot more environmental hazard than the previous, with giant attack towers flanking enemies posted up behind barricades. We can use some of the environment to our advantage, running through wheat fields to hide from the enemy, though the enemy can use these against us if they have fire in their arsenal. If the Rotwood was where the nation got its lumber, Hogstead is where it gets its food, besides the fishing of course. Working through the zone, we'll eventually encounter our first Blavatsky hunter. I always thought they were wielding keyblades. They move with anime speed to swipe through our hordes, and it feels like they prioritise our ranged units, though I don't think in reality that's the case. Make sure you keep moving and attack them when their feet are flat, and after defeating them you'll unlock the Fishman, a stockier denizen of the Sunken Swarm. They summon in fewer numbers than swarm units, but higher stats overall. I'd rank them at A tier, but higher than their swarm counterparts. I didn't use them too much, but they're a solid summon. Their entry reads, not much is known about the Fishmen, but it is said they're direct descendants of Dagon, and the line of primordial eldritch beings that thrived before the first deluge. They live in vast sunken cities, but as time passed, ocean currents twisting their bodies and their weird darkness dissolving their soul, they developed into creatures of gloomy gait with a hunger for fresh flesh. Now, advancing forward, this zone boasts two options for bosses similar to Karlshaven. If we head to the east, we can encounter the Witch. She's the reason the game needs 3 runs to get all of the minions, as she says the witches have no quarrel with the oceans, and she's right. We could choose to fight her or not. In the book, she's described with an entry saying, when Hansel and Gretel came running back to their parents, following the breadcrumbs they left behind, they knew that the woman who tried to feed them in their home would be hung as soon as they lied about her intentions. They watched eagerly and giggled selfishly at their prank, as neighbours gathered and took to the home with arms and rope in hand. The witch Elizabeth had done no harm, at least not to them. Now, the bishop's our quarry, not her, and even throughout the game, we're only ever required to kill the bishop's men. Civilians, while advantageous to kill, don't actually lock us out from advancing. If we choose to leave the witch, we unlock the Black Cat, a high damage, low health minion that will jump in, assassin style, onto single units and eviscerate them. In large swarms, these things are ridiculous because they'll all jump on the same unit and just do massive damage. They find themselves slotted into S tier. Their entry reads, an old man and his wife would walk down to where the cats gathered by the coast with leftover fried fish. Feeding the cats for years, they developed a bond and could almost talk to them. After his wife passed, he adopted one that he named Fishsticks and swore she would whisper to him. She lived with him until his death, and some of the townsfolk say she still lives out amongst the witches. If we choose to fight the witch, things take a turn. The fight can be challenging, especially for a newer player, as her attacks are a bit all over the place. She could duplicate herself, fire lasers, fire fire, cauldron turrets, all while you're probably a few units down from the previous area. Once defeated, however, she drops the card for the Drowned, a slow-moving unit that does AoE damage centered on herself and extinguishes any flames near her, the floor, or your units nearby. As cool as this sounds on paper, she's so much slower than your units and her range is quite low. When you force her to attack, she goes stationary, so if she's already behind your units, she becomes a bit useless. This drops her down into C tier. I can see the use for her and I've used her a few times in the game, but I just never got her working well. Her entry reads, before you may burn her, how does one make sure somebody is a witch? You must make sure she's made of wood. Wood floats, and ducks float. So if she sinks, she must be human, and if she floats, she must be a witch to burn. Now, if we headed up north, we'd encounter a different boss entirely, the Thistle Guards. They ended up at the doorstep of the Grand Cathedral at age 9. The Archbishop saw their thorns and their beauty and pitied their unused potential. He took them in and gave them everything they could dream of. He showed them literature, wealth, and the wonder of art. But the fact was, they only dreamt of violence. To this, his answer was in a serum the alchemist made. It would transform their stature from huge to monstrous, and secure their devotion to the church. They stood guards at the gates as undying symbols of the gifts. A 2-on-1 boss fight with multiple phases. Their attacks are quite readable, but when they're both on the ground, things get a little bit sticky trying to juggle them both. The fight is enjoyable and definitely easier than the Witch. For their sacrifice, they give us the flesh, a rolling mass of amalgamated flesh, similar to the Billy Bear meat you can buy from the supermarket or a can of Spam. After a small cooldown, the blob will roll at the nearest target, doing heavy damage provided it actually hits. Sometimes enemies move out of the way. I put it in A tier due to its inaccuracy and its innate ability to roll straight through Flamer's fire every time I tried to fight with them. Their entry in the book states, "The unknown entity seems to be a runaway mollusk. It most likely crawled out of its shell when it was called upon Dagon to fight. It normally hunts by waiting for its prey to get in close, then it would pounce using momentum to its advantage. The flesh is not recommended to barbecue." Nova Ugarit is our final stage. Once again, there's a split path, but this time only one boss. This stage is known for its difficulty, and even on repeat playthroughs, parts made me struggle. Tests everything you've learned and makes you squeeze 110% out of your minions. God forbid you start a stage after too many die, you'll be screwed. It's an endurance battle, and mistakes are costly. It's very cool though. The scenery from sewers to graveyards to gardens, the rows of Victorian style houses, and the boss at the end of it all. There's also 2 minions up for grabs here. Firstly, the Locust. The card that summons a large number of temporary minions. They have the same timer system as the Lich summons, and they're pretty cool. I imagine their intended use is to bolster your squad and spending gold to summon them, but temporary minions in a game with such large maps puts a bad taste in my mouth. Once summoned, you'll probably only get use out of them for 1 frame. C tier. Their entry reads, "Within the finely sheared shrubs of the city gardens, just below the surface where roots are entwined like corpses on a death cart, millions of locust eggs lay in wait to be birthed by dark magic. Every civilization feared them as they decimate crops in just a few moments. Then, as quickly as they came, they all fall dead to impregnate the ready earth for another attack." There's also the maggots. They're slow-moving melee units that multiply after killing enemies directly. I think the Drowher was meant to do this as well, but the maggots seem to be the only ones that do. These actually saved a couple of my runs by being able to multiply after I lost a lot of units. They're better than the Swarm stats-wise, even though you only start with, fewer of them. I put them at A tier. Their entry states, "As the city grew, so did its disease and rot. All the flesh that was wasted in heaps on the shores of Karlshaven were filled with maggots. All the cows and pigs in the farms that were slaughtered in sacrifice would crawl with maggots. All the people that lived in the city, fearing the day their name would send them into the pit, were all filled with maggots. This life is a feast for the dead." After blasting through Nova Ugarit, either through the sewers or the gardens, we're met with Count Volgrave. No matter where one was on the peninsula, everyone heard of Count Volgrave. He brought gunpowder and medicines hither unheard of at all. He advanced industries and made automated machines for all manner of tasks. Being intrigued by alchemy and the possibility to harness the power of Dagon, he made potions and elixirs that gave him incredible agility, strength, and made him live longer than most men. He was awesomely intelligent, knowing all about the antediluvian monsters. His only weakness is his insatiable curiosity. He has multiple phases, attacks, and would probably be the hardest boss in the game if you didn't blitz him down quickly. He telegraphs all of his moves, and thank God he does. They're so lethal, but once we defeat him, however, there's another phase. The madman uses the power of Dagon against us, so the real fight begins. His moveset changes and we have to take him out one last time. With his defeat, the Cathedral lies ahead of us, and the Toad card is ours. Now the Toad's a very unique minion. It jumps into enemies and explodes, killing itself but doing large AoE. The only problem I found was its intended use is to kill groups, and in a game where minions are hard to isolate, you have to kill everything and you don't know what's coming next. It always felt like a bad investment to waste a summon on the Toad just to lose them to some cheap fodder, or perhaps even just civilians. I'd put them at D tier, though they do have their uses. In the book, they're mentioned as a defense mechanism to protect their tadpole spawn. These giant toads figured out a way to create a chemical combustion that would kill themselves, but also any predator that may be in the area. Villagers in swampy areas would sometimes use them as fireworks, but many lost a finger or two. With our route clear, we can finally enter the cathedral and end this. As we approach, the gilded ornaments shine, and we could see what the greedy bishop used our wealth on. He forgets his place and we remind him. Chasing him throughout the halls. The story goes by telling and retelling that the king who met Agra de Pesca centuries past yet lives, and so too his son, now the Archbishop of the Church of Dagon. The Archbishop was prepared to sacrifice all he had in the name of Dagon, until the day his name bubbled up through the communion well. Believing to be a god himself, a shepherd of imperishable holiness, he thought it just to challenge Dagon's will for the first and last time. Funnily enough, killing the bishop's actually insanely easy. His attacks are a mere dead man's thrashing, and he has no more pawns left to sacrifice. There even comes a point where he starts throwing gold coins at us, saying, you know, take it back, take it back. He's fearing for his own life. With his death, we've no more quarrel with the denizens of Nova Ugarit or the whole peninsula, and our swarm begins the march back to the sea. With the bishop's death comes the Hermit, a slow-moving tank of a unit whose sole purpose is to block enemy projectiles. Now I can see his use, but similar to the Drowned, whenever you attack with him he becomes stationary, and the minions I like using were just a bit too quick to stay in the AoE shield. I'd put him at D tier. His entry reads, "Some of those that became cultists venture further into the depths than others. They became one with the ocean floors, slowly but surely turning into hermits. Like their crab counterparts, they became highly resilient and practiced ways to protect themselves from the outside world. Isolated within their shells, they developed volumes of mana collected in the grand Cathedral of Nova Ugarit." With the march complete, so ends our run through the story. We could start a new run on a hard mode and experience the changes that brings. We could even go through the variety of arenas we've unlocked, unlock the rest of the apostles. There's still plenty to do after a few playthroughs, so big question is, what did I think? Conclusion time, baby! The gameplay was fun for the most part. The themes and aesthetic unique as far as pixel art games I've seen, and the developers did a good job of bundling it up. Some of the gripes I have include gameplay balance when it comes to the different units as seen by my tier list, and of course the huge difficulty spike in the final area. I feel like there's a lot of replayability, but I wish subsequent ones changed a little bit more, and that perhaps hard mode could have included some hard mode exclusive enemies or minions that we could have unlocked. The game costs $13.99 on Steam, and I've roughly 12 hours from free playthroughs, plus a bit of the extra content. I think this is the sort of game you wait until it's on sale, though I'm definitely saying it's worth experiencing, even if just once through. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Over and out, Smooth Brains.